Have you ever wondered why certain jokes, which in one context seem hilarious and harmless, in another sound deeply offensive and cruel? Why what feels funny to one person can be painful to another? This question, at the heart of many contemporary debates on political correctness, is not new. In fact, it is one of the oldest and richest territories of philosophy. Exploring the limits of humor means diving into a deep reflection on human nature, our social life, and the delicate threads that weave morality and ethics. It's not about finding a definitive rulebook, but about understanding the forces at play whenever someone tells a joke. It's a journey that invites us to move beyond the simplistic question, "Can I make this joke?" toward much richer ones. What is the intention behind this humor? What is its effect? And ultimately, what kind of person do I want to be through what I choose to laugh at? Classical Greek philosophy gives us the first valuable clues. Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, discussed the virtue of eutrapelia, which we might translate as good humor or wittiness. For Aristotle, the virtuous person is the one who finds the right balance between two vices. Boorishness, the person who lacks all sense of humor and is unpleasant, and buffoonery, the clown who jokes about anything and everything without discernment. The boundary of humor, therefore, is not an external line imposed from outside, but an inner measure of character. It is the wisdom to discern the right moment, the right subject, the right audience, and the right intention. The buffoon sins by lacking seriousness, by respecting no limits, while the bore sins by excess seriousness, by denying humor its vital role in social life. The virtuous person, however, balances lightness with gravity, using humor to ease tensions and promote fellowship, never to humiliate or destroy. This Aristotelian concept of the golden mean leads us directly to the core question of whether the limits of humor are absolute or relative. If we follow this logic, the limit is inherently relative. It depends on context, on the relationship between people, on intention and perception. A joke shared among close friends with trust and shared experience might spark laughter. The same joke, told by a stranger in a public space to a diverse group, might provoke shock or rejection. The limit has shifted. It is not a fixed, universal barrier, but a dynamic field defined by human relationships in a given moment. This suggests that we cannot create a universal catalog of forbidden jokes, but we can, and must, cultivate sensitivity to read the room, to understand context, and to anticipate, as much as possible, the impact of our words. Still, does that mean everything is relative? Here, philosophy can guide us with another crucial perspective offered by Immanuel Kant and his categorical imperative. Kant argued that we should act only according to maxims we would want to become universal law. Applying this moral test to humor, we are invited to ask, would I approve of a world in which everyone told jokes about insert a vulnerable group, a personal tragedy, or an intrinsic trait? If the answer is no, then that joke fails Kant's test. The limit of humor, in this view, takes on a more absolute character. It is drawn at the fundamental humanity of the other. If your humor depends on diminishing, dehumanizing, or treating someone merely as a means to an end, in this case a laugh, rather than as an end in themselves, of being worthy of respect, then it violates a fundamental ethical principle. The limit exists, and it is absolute insofar as it cannot transgress human dignity. This tension between the relative, context, and the absolute, dignity, is where most real debates occur. Humor based on negative stereotypes is the perfect example. In a very specific context, members of an oppressed group might use insider humor to cope with the pressures of prejudice. That humor can function as a coping mechanism, a form of reclaiming a painful narrative. It is relative to that shared experience. However, when someone outside that group repeats the same joke, the context changes dramatically. The intention is no longer solidarity or resistance, but often the reinforcement of the very stereotype. The effect is not empowerment, but oppression. The line was crossed not because the words changed, but because the power dynamics behind them did. Another crucial layer in this reflection is intention versus impact. Many defenses of controversial jokes rest on intention. I didn't mean to offend. It was just a joke. Yet moral philosophy, especially in more contemporary perspectives, urges us to take the real impact of our actions seriously, regardless of our intention. If you throw a stone without meaning to and it hits someone, your lack of intent doesn't heal the wound. The same is true with words. A joke that causes pain, reinforces trauma, or normalizes violence has a real impact on the world. Ignoring that impact in favor of a supposed absolute freedom of comic expression is to abandon our ethical responsibility toward others. It is to privilege our right to amuse ourselves over another's right to be treated with dignity. The limits of humor, then, are also defined by consequences. This does not mean that humor should be sanitized, bland, or incapable of touching on difficult themes. On the contrary, the most powerful and transformative humor is often the one that challenges power, criticizes authorities, and exposes absurdities and hypocrisies. Satire, for instance, has historically been a form of humor that serves as social correction. It ridicules not the vulnerable, but the powerful. It points the finger not at the victims, but at the oppressors. Its ethical boundary is clear: punch up, not down. Making jokes about marginalized groups is kicking those already on the ground. Making jokes about the powerful, the prejudiced, or the corrupt is using humor as a tool of justice and social balance. This is the kind of humor Aristotle would likely call virtuous, humor that serves a purpose greater than laughter itself. Reflecting on the limits of humor is, ultimately, reflecting on the kind of community we want to build. Laughter is a powerful social glue. It brings people together, but it can also be a potent weapon of exclusion and humiliation. When humor is used to mark a difference as ridiculous, inferior, or worthy of scorn, it builds walls. It says implicitly, we who laugh belong, you, who are the target, do not. This is perhaps the most important measure for evaluating a joke. Does it bring people together in shared laughter, or does it divide those who laugh from those laughed at? There are no easy answers. The way forward is not blanket censorship nor unrestricted license. It is deep reflection, empathy, and the courage to listen when we are told that our words, however unintended, caused harm. It is the willingness to consider whether our right to make a joke outweighs our duty not to cause unnecessary suffering. It is understanding that freedom of expression comes hand in hand with responsibility for expression. The limits of humor are not written in some distant rulebook. They are constantly negotiated by all of us in every interaction, with every joke we tell or choose not to tell. They lie in the space between your mouth and another's ear, and that space is filled with history, pain, dignity, and humanity. Choosing to reflect on this is choosing to build a world where laughter is truly a sound of joy and not a cry of pain.